Get out of my way, Nathan. Claire snapped, her diamond bracelet catching the courthouse lights. You lost. Accept it. Her new boyfriend, slick-haired attorney Paul Whitmore, smirked as he tightened his arm around her waist. Nothing personal, Nate. Well, maybe a little. Their laughter echoed down the marble hallway, sharp and cold. I stood there in my last decent suit, clutching a crumpled envelope that used to hold everything. My business, my home, my pride. Hall & Son Supply had been mine, built from the dust of a rented garage and a promise I'd made to my kids. Now, it belonged to them. To her. Even custody of Ethan and Grace, my 19-year-old twins, was gone. Go ahead, sue me, Claire said over her shoulder. Oh wait, you can't. You're broke, remember? She laughed again, that same laugh I once thought was beautiful. 3 months later, I was sleeping on a pull-out sofa in a damp studio that smelled like mold and old regret. The man in the mirror wasn't the Nathan Hale who'd once signed million-dollar contracts. He was just a ghost in a thrift store shirt, trying to remember how to breathe. One rainy afternoon, while pawing through a box of old papers, I found a dusty envelope with my late grandfather's handwriting. For Nathan, open when you've lost everything. I smiled bitterly. Guess that's now, Grandpa. Inside was a note and a small bank account number. I figured it was nothing, maybe $50 he'd stashed away decades ago. Still, I drove to the bank. What else did I have to do? The teller, a young woman with trembling hands, typed in the number. Then she froze. Her eyes widened like she'd seen a ghost. Sir, I need to get my manager, she whispered. Moments later, a man in a navy suit approached. He looked at the screen, then at me, his face pale. Mr. Hale, he said slowly. This account's been compounding interest since 1962. You might want to sit down. He turned the monitor toward me. I stared. The numbers didn't make sense. That can't be right, I muttered. Oh, it's right, he said softly. Your grandfather invested in a long-term bond fund before the dollar conversion in '71. He never touched it. I walked out of that bank shaking. The balance wasn't $50. It was enough to buy back everything I'd lost, and then some. Enough to rebuild. Enough to make them both wish they'd never underestimated me. I didn't call Claire. I didn't text Paul. I just smiled, thinking of my grandfather, a man who'd worked factory shifts for 40 years and somehow outsmarted time itself. For the first time in months, I felt something new stirring in my chest. Not anger, not revenge, hope. Because sometimes the people who built quietly, without bragging, without greed, leave behind more than money. They leave second chances. We had 32 employees by then. My younger brother, Ben Hale, ran the delivery trucks with a precision that could make the military jealous, and my cousin, Rob Carter, managed commercial accounts with charm and hustle. Every Thursday morning, I'd sit at Millie's Diner on Route 41 with my accountant, Walter Briggs, going over numbers between plates of bacon and half-drunk cups of coffee. Nate, this is exceptional, Walter would say, adjusting his glasses. Most small businesses don't last 5 years. You're pushing 16 and still climbing. He wasn't exaggerating. We'd just landed the Henderson Construction Group contract, one of the biggest developers in the region. That deal alone brought in $2 million annually. Between our retail side and other commercial clients, Hale Supply Company was pulling in close to $8 million a year. After taxes, payroll, and smart investments, I had managed to save up a comfortable $6.7 million. Our house in Westchester was the dream Claire and I used to talk about back when we were newlyweds eating takeout on cardboard boxes. 6 bedrooms, 4 baths, a pool with lights that shimmered like champagne at night. She'd redesigned the kitchen 3 times, each version more extravagant than the last. After Ethan and Grace started school, Claire decided she was done working as a dental hygienist. Managing our social calendar is a full-time job, she'd tell me with a little laugh. You don't understand, Nate. The country club isn't about golf. It's about connections. That's where deals are born. She wasn't entirely wrong. I'd met a few clients there, mostly through charity events and corporate mixers I barely had time to attend. Claire lived for those afternoons, the luncheons, the galas, the wine tastings. She'd come home glowing from attention, telling me about who bought a house in Aspen, who summered in the Hamptons, who wore what. That's when Paul Whitmore's name started slipping into her stories. Paul's brilliant, she said one evening while scrolling through her phone. His firm handles all the high-end divorces. Partner at 35. Can you imagine? I didn't have the time to imagine. My days started before dawn and ended after dark. I'd be up at 5, hit the warehouse by 6, and handle paperwork until 8 or 9 at night. Saturdays were for inventory. Sundays were supposed to be family days, but something always came up: a busted valve at a job site, a truck delay, a customer who needed an emergency order filled. Ethan was at Boston College, majoring in business, following my lead. Grace was at NYU, studying marketing. Their combined tuition was astronomical, but I didn't flinch. They were good kids. They texted me now and then, mostly when they needed money, occasionally just to say they missed home. Claire handled the parenting details, the school updates, the social check-ins, the emotional stuff. I was the provider, the reliable one. I once overheard Grace tell her friend, "Dad's married to that warehouse." I laughed it off, though it hurt more than I let on. I told myself it was all for them: the long hours, the missed dinners, the vacations we never took. The business would one day be theirs. Sometimes I'd hear my late father's voice echoing in my mind. "No one ever lies on their deathbed wishing they'd worked more, son." But I drowned it out. Work was purpose. Work was love, even if no one else saw it that way. What I didn't see was the distance growing in Claire's eyes, or how she started staying out later, sipping more wine, coming home smelling like unfamiliar cologne. I thought we were building a legacy together. She was planning her exit strategy. Tuesday, March 14th. I'll never forget that date. Our 22nd anniversary. For once, I left the warehouse early, 3 in the afternoon. I'd made reservations at La Fontaine, the French restaurant where I'd proposed all those years ago. 24 red roses sat on the passenger seat beside me. When I turned into our driveway, I saw a black BMW 7 Series parked in front of the garage. I knew that car. Claire had pointed it out at the club months earlier, gushing over the leather interior and the custom sound system. My chest tightened. I sat there for a long minute, gripping the steering wheel, staring at that BMW gleaming in the sunlight like a black mirror of everything I'd ignored. Then I got out, roses in hand, and walked toward the house where my whole life was about to end. The second thing I noticed was the curtains, closed tight in the middle of the day. Claire never shut those. Sunlight was her obsession. She said it made the house feel alive. But that afternoon, my house was quiet. Too quiet. I stood in the foyer with 24 roses in my hand, the smell of them mixing with the faint trace of wine and perfume that didn't belong to me. Then I heard it, soft laughter drifting from upstairs. My bedroom. My bed. It wasn't nervous laughter or guilty laughter. It was the kind of easy, practiced laughter two people share when the secret isn't new anymore. I didn't storm up there. I didn't shout. I walked out, sat in my truck, and stared at the steering wheel for 3 hours straight, watching daylight turn to gold. At 6:30, I saw him, Paul Whitmore, walk out of my front door, straightening his tie, my wife's robe trailing behind him as she kissed him goodbye, like it was the most natural thing in the world. It was the silk robe I'd given her for Christmas. He left, smug and satisfied. Claire stood in the doorway, waving, then disappeared inside. I stayed another 2 hours before finally walking in. The house smelled like lemon and garlic. She was at the stove, humming, wearing fresh clothes, hair still damp from a shower. "You're late," she said, without turning around. Anniversary or not, a call would have been nice. The next morning, at exactly 9:15, I was in the middle of a staff meeting when the door opened. A man in a gray suit stepped in, holding an envelope. "Nathan Hale?" he asked. "Yes." "You've been served." 32 employees sat in stunned silence as he placed the documents in my hands and walked out. Ben stood up like he was ready to throw the guy through a wall, but I stopped him. My hands were steady, though my heart was hammering. I opened the envelope. Divorce papers. But not just that. Claire wasn't just leaving me. She was burning the whole thing to the ground. Claims of emotional abuse, financial manipulation, abandonment, hidden assets, and infidelity. Every word was a lie, but it didn't matter. Paul Whitmore had drafted the perfect ambush. The first meeting was held in his office, a glass tower downtown overlooking the city, designed to remind people of power. Claire sat beside him in a brand new designer suit and diamond earrings I'd never seen before. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "My client has endured years of emotional neglect," Paul began, voice smooth as oil. Mr. Hale's obsession with work left her isolated and humiliated. We have 5 years of documentation. What documentation? Asked Mark Douglas, my lawyer. Paul opened a box full of folders like a magician revealing his trick. Journals, he said, sliding them across the table. Photos, financial statements, witness affidavits. The journals were supposedly written by Claire, entries describing my cruelty, my temper, how I controlled her every move. There were photos of me working during family holidays, bank statements showing suspicious transfers, and even letters from country club members claiming they'd witnessed verbal abuse. This is a fabrication, I said, my voice breaking. Claire, you know this isn't true. Tell them. She looked at me then, her eyes colder than I'd ever seen them. The only lie, Nathan, was pretending you loved me. Paul rested a hand on her arm, like the final insult. We'll be requesting full custody of Ethan and Grace as dependents, he added. They're adults, I said. You can't get custody of adults. They're college students, Mark muttered beside me. There are loopholes. He's exploiting them. And Paul was doing more than that. The forensic accountant he brought in, his own cousin, though we didn't discover that until months later, testified that I'd hidden assets offshore, undervalued the company, and committed tax evasion. Each denial meant more fees. Each motion drained another piece of what I had left. Paul had every advantage. He played golf with Judge Martin Brennan, who just happened to preside over the case. I'd voted for Brennan once, thinking he cared about fairness. Watching him nod along to Paul's every word while dismissing my lawyer's objections, I realized justice wasn't blind, it was bought. Claire cried on cue when she described my abuse. How I'd isolated her, made her feel worthless, controlled every penny. The woman who'd spent $40,000 remodeling a kitchen claimed she'd been a prisoner in her own home. Then came the final blow, letters from Ethan and Grace. They said I'd never been there, that I'd chosen work over family. Reading their words felt like being cut open from the inside. The hearing lasted 6 hours. By the end, Paul had painted me as a ruthless, greedy man who destroyed his own family. The gavel came down like a gunshot, and just like that, everything I'd built, my marriage, my business, my name, belonged to someone else. Judge Brennan's ruling came down like a hammer, swift, cold, final. Claire got the house, the business, every cent of savings, and full custody of Ethan and Grace, along with the maximum possible support based on my former income. The gavel struck once, and my life was officially gone. I walked out of that courtroom with nothing but the suit I was wearing and the keys to my 20-year-old Honda Civic, the one I'd kept because my dad and I rebuilt the engine together when I was in college. This is justice, Paul Whitmore said loudly enough for the hallway to hear. Then, leaning close, he whispered, by the way, she tastes incredible. I didn't hit him. I just walked past. There wasn't anything left worth fighting for. The apartment I found on Belmont Avenue rented for $800 a month. 1 room, peeling paint, and a view of a brick wall. The smell of curry from the Indian restaurant downstairs soaked into everything I owned. After 3 months, I knew every water stain on the ceiling and could tell time by the baby upstairs who cried at midnight, 2 a.m., and 4:30. My meals came from the dollar store, instant ramen, canned beans, peanut butter on white bread. The poverty didn't crush me. The invisibility did. Old employees who used to call me boss crossed the street when they saw me. Country club friends stared at their phones at gas stations, pretending not to notice me. Even Ben, my brother, had to keep his distance. Claire had made him operations manager at Hale Supply, and he needed the paycheck. I'm sorry, Nate, he whispered during one secret meeting at a highway rest stop. She's watching everything. Paul told her you're plotting something. If she finds out I met you, I'm done. I just nodded. I couldn't blame him. My bank account had exactly $1,043 left. The court had garnished 70% of my warehouse wages for alimony and support. Judge Brennan's order used my old income, not the $12 an hour I was earning now. My lawyer, Mark Douglas, tried to file for a modification, but that required another retainer I didn't have. Ethan wouldn't answer my calls. Grace picked up once, sobbing. Mom showed us everything, she said through tears. The accounts in the Caymans, the messages with that woman. I can't believe you did this. I wanted to scream, to tell her none of it was real, but Paul's fabrications looked more convincing than the truth. My family was gone. My business, my reputation, my name, gone. At 45, I wasn't just broke. I was erased. It was a Thursday evening when I went to my storage unit. It was the only thing Claire didn't know existed, leased under my father's name years ago to store his old belongings. The space smelled like dust and motor oil, filled with boxes of tools, faded photographs, and a lifetime's worth of forgotten things. I almost threw the box aside, the one labeled important papers. Inside were old receipts, insurance forms, a few yellowed letters, and a small worn shoebox. Inside that box was a savings passbook from First National Trust, dated January 15, 1960. The account name stopped me cold. Nathan Henry Hale. Tucked inside was a note written in my grandfather's unmistakable handwriting. For my grandson's future. Do not touch except in dire need. Henry Hale? I sat down right there on the concrete floor, surrounded by rusted wrenches and faded memories, holding that note like it was a lifeline. I remembered him so clearly then. His calloused hands, the faint smell of oil and tobacco, the way he used to slip me $1 and whisper, "Save half, spend half. Time makes money grow, Nate." Always remember that. He'd worked 40 years at the Ford plant, never earning more than $15,000 a year. $50 in 1960 had been nearly a week's wages. We'd all assumed the account vanished during the endless wave of mergers. First National to Commerce, Commerce to Republic, Republic to Chase. Still, something inside told me to see it through. The next morning, I ironed my one decent shirt, the one I kept for job interviews, and drove to the Chase branch that had once been First National Trust. The building was all glass and steel now, modern and sterile, nothing like the old brick bank my grandfather would have known. But as I stepped inside, clutching that passbook, I had no idea that what waited on the other side of that counter would change everything I thought I'd lost. The teller was young, mid-20s maybe, with neat brown hair and a voice that sounded like she actually liked her job. Her name tag read Patricia. "How can I help you today, sir?" she asked with a friendly smile. I slid the faded blue passbook across the counter. The paper was so thin it might have disintegrated if I breathed too hard. "I think this account might still exist," I said. "It's from 1960. I'd like to close it, if possible." She tilted her head, clearly skeptical, and tapped a few keys. Her brow furrowed. "That's odd. I'm not finding anything under this routing system. Give me a second. I'll check the archived database." Patricia typed faster, then stopped completely. Her eyes widened just a fraction, and she looked up at me differently now. "Mr. Hale, would you mind waiting for a moment? I'd like to get my branch manager." I almost laughed. Figures. They were probably going to tell me the account had been turned over to the state sometime during the Reagan administration, or that it was wiped out during one of the mergers. One more dead, and in a life full of them. When Patricia returned, she wasn't alone. A tall man in a gray suit walked beside her, mid-50s, polished but not arrogant. His name tag read Theodore Grayson, branch manager. "Mr. Hale," he said with a tone that carried quiet gravity. "Could we step into my office for a moment? There's something we need to discuss privately." My stomach tightened, but after everything I'd already lost, I figured I could handle one more disappointment. Theodore's office looked like the kind of place that still believed in dignity. Real wood desk, leather chairs, old framed certificates from banks that no longer existed. He motioned for me to sit while he placed my grandfather's passbook on the desk with both hands, as though it were something sacred. "I've been in banking 30 years, he said slowly, "and I don't think I've ever seen one of these in active status." He started typing, checking multiple systems. With each click, his face shifted from focus to disbelief. Finally, he leaned back and exhaled. "Mr. Hale, what you're sitting on here is extraordinary." I frowned. "Extraordinary how?" He turned the passbook toward me. "Your grandfather didn't just open a savings account. He opened what was called a Century Growth Deposit, a rare product First National Trust offered briefly in the early 60s. It had a fixed compound interest rate, 7.5%, and was designed to stay untouched for at least 45 years. Every merger that followed honored the contract." He paused, checking my ID again. "According to our records, the account was locked until you turned 45. And from what I see here, that happened 3 months ago." I nodded slowly. "That's right." He swiveled his monitor toward me. "Then, Mr. Hale, this account became yours in January." The screen glowed with a number that didn't make sense. At first I thought there was a decimal missing. Then I counted the digits. Twice. $4,847,539 $50.28. My throat went dry. That can't be right. It was only $50. Theodore chuckled softly, but there was reverence in his tone. $50 at 7.5%, compounded annually for 64 years. That's the miracle of time, Mr. Hale. The longer it sits, the faster it grows. By year 20, it was worth $200. By year 40, it crossed $8,000. But the last 20 years? That's where the real explosion happens. I just stared. My hands trembled in my lap. This is mine, I whispered. He nodded. It is. Every cent. But that's not all. He rose, opened a file cabinet, and pulled out a dusty folder sealed with a brittle rubber band. Your grandfather, Mr. Henry Hale, also created an investment addendum in 1965. According to this record, he instructed the bank to purchase a small number of shares in a textile company called Berkshire Hathaway. My breath caught. Wait, the Berkshire Hathaway. The very same, Theodore said. Back then, the shares cost $19 each. He bought 5 of them. After all these years, after every split, reinvestment, and dividend, the estimated value of those holdings today is just over $8.2 million. I felt the world tilt slightly. Theodore reached for a crystal decanter on his credenza and poured me a glass of water. I drank it in one gulp, not even tasting it. I don't understand, I said quietly. He was a factory worker. How did he even know to do something like this? Theodore smiled gently. Sometimes wisdom skips the professionals and finds the ordinary man. Your grandfather must have believed in patience. And in you. He opened the folder again and took out a small yellowed envelope, the paper thin and delicate from time. My name, Nathan Hale, was written on it in my grandfather's steady cursive. This was sealed in 1960, Theodore said softly. His instructions were clear. It was to be delivered only to you, and only when the account became active. I took the envelope with shaking hands. It was light, like it might only hold a single piece of paper, but somehow it felt heavier than anything I'd ever held. Inside was a folded note written in ink that had faded to brown. Nathan, if you're reading this, it means time kept its promise. You come from men who work with their hands and keep their word. I built nothing grand in my life except this small seed. Don't waste it. Use it to build something that outlives you, and forgive those who tried to break you along the way. Time evens everything out. Love always. Grandpa Henry. By the time I finished reading, my vision blurred. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a failure. I felt like a man reborn. Inside the envelope was a single page, the paper yellowed with time, the ink faded but steady. Henry Hale's handwriting, strong even after all these years. Nathan, if you're reading this, it means you've lived long enough to understand that life takes as much as it gives. I don't know what brought you here, only that every man eventually reaches a storm he can't outrun. When that day comes, you'll need a harbor. Your father, Ben, is a good man, but cautious. He sees the world as it is. You, I believe, will see it as it could be. But even dreamers get knocked to their knees sometimes. I don't have much to offer except a few things I've learned the hard way. First, time is the only true wealth. Money fades, moments don't. Second, what's hidden can't be stolen. Third, a man who seems broke is often the one who can't be bought. I met a young fellow once, Warren, from Omaha, who talked about patience and value like they were virtues, not business strategies. I liked his way of thinking, so I took a chance on the company he believed in. Maybe it'll amount to nothing. Maybe it'll change your life. Use this gift wisely, Nathan. Be kind, but never naive. Trust no one completely, not even those who say they love you. The world is full of clever men who mistake deceit for intelligence. Never show all your cards, and never let them see what truly matters to you until it's too late for them to take it. Your grandfather, Henry Hale. By the time I reached the end, my vision blurred. Somehow, the old man had seen straight through time, straight through me. I looked up at Theodore Grayson, who was watching me quietly. He knew, I whispered. Somehow he knew. Theodore nodded gently. There's one more thing you should understand, Mr. Hale. According to the original contract, if anyone had tried to access this account before your 45th birthday, every cent of interest and investment growth would have been forfeited. It would have gone to the state treasury. Completely lost. The words hit me like a hammer. Claire and Paul had spent months scouring every corner of my life, hiring forensic accountants, digging into every transaction, every business deal, convinced they'd found everything. Yet the one fortune that could have changed everything had been waiting silently since the day I was born, untouched, invisible. What should I do now? I asked quietly. Theodore smiled faintly. First, I'll have our private banking division reach out to set up the proper management accounts. Second, you'll need a tax attorney and a solid investment team. And third, he leaned in slightly, you might want to keep this between us until you've decided what comes next. I plan to, I said. My voice came out colder than I expected. As I stepped out of that glass and steel building, sunlight broke through the clouds. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the broken man Claire had tried to make me. I felt like the storm that was finally coming for her. For the next 2 weeks, I lived as if nothing had changed. I still ate instant noodles in my tiny studio on Belmont Avenue. I still showed up for my warehouse shifts. I told no one about the millions sitting in my new accounts. But behind the silence, a plan was forming. One night, I made a call to Arthur Blackstone, a name that carried weight in every legal circle from New York to D.C. He was known for 2 things, winning impossible cases and making corrupt men disappear from the courtroom floor. Dennis Whitmore used to work for me, Arthur said when we met in his office overlooking Central Park. His voice was smooth, but his eyes were steel. Brilliant mind. Zero conscience. I've been waiting years for a chance to deal with him properly. Over the next month, Arthur's team unearthed everything I'd only suspected. Paul Whitmore, Claire's so-called lawyer and lover, wasn't just unethical. He was criminal. He'd been paying Judge Martin Brennan under the table for favorable rulings. The accountant who'd testified against me, Walter Briggs, was Paul's cousin, and every document he'd submitted was falsified. Arthur laid it all out in black and white. Wire transfers, falsified affidavits, offshore accounts. All of it tied neatly to Paul and Brennan. And Claire? She'd been unfaithful long before Paul ever entered the picture. There were records, photos, even membership logs showing her business trips were romantic weekends with 2 other men from the country club. Arthur leaned back in his chair and said, "We're not just reopening your divorce, Mr. Hale. We're filing federal charges. Fraud, perjury, racketeering, judicial misconduct. They don't just lose in court, they lose their freedom." When the FBI raided Paul Whitmore's office 3 weeks later, I was packing boxes in my apartment, ready to move. I watched the news that night, the anchor's voice calm and detached as she read. Prominent divorce attorney and family court judge arrested in sweeping corruption scandal. Federal investigators say evidence points to years of collusion and falsified testimony affecting dozens of cases. Judge Brennan was arrested the same afternoon, cameras flashing as he was led away from the courthouse he once ruled. Claire called me that evening. Her voice was shaking, her words slurred with panic. "What did you do? Nathan, how did you? How is this possible? You had nothing." I almost laughed. "You're right," I said softly. "That's exactly what you thought." I hung up and looked out over the city lights from my new high-rise apartment, the kind of view money couldn't buy because it came with peace. Grandpa Henry had been right all along. Real wealth isn't loud. Real power doesn't shout. It waits, quietly, patiently, until the moment the world stops under its weight. When the final verdict came through, I didn't feel anger, just a deep, calm certainty. I had nothing you could see, I told the reporters crowding outside the courthouse. My grandfather taught me that lesson, though it took losing everything to understand it. The divorce judgment was officially overturned. The court found fraud, collusion, and evidence tampering on nearly every level. Claire was ordered to return the house, the remaining shares in the business, and what was left of the money she hadn't already burned through on designer clothes, luxury vacations, and her endless cosmetic self-improvements. Paul Whitmore, the man she'd betrayed me with, turned on her the moment the prosecutors offered a deal. Facing disbarment and prison time, he told investigators everything, that Claire had planned every detail, from fake financial reports to the judge's secret kickbacks. When Ethan and Grace showed up at my door a week later, I almost didn't open it. They believed every lie she told, that I'd drained their college funds, that I'd hidden money offshore, that I was a selfish, bitter man who wanted to see her ruined. "Dad, we're so sorry," Grace whispered as she collapsed into my arms. Her brother stood behind her, his face pale, ashamed. She showed us papers, messages, it all looked real. I hugged them both. "You're my kids," I said quietly. You don't need to apologize. You were lied to, just like I was. 6 months later, I sold Hale Supply Company to Douglas and Briggs Construction for $12.4 million. They needed a reputable vendor after the scandal tarnished everyone involved with the old contracts. Between that sale and my grandfather Henry Hale's long-hidden investment, I had more wealth than I'd ever imagined. But I didn't buy a mansion or a luxury car. I purchased a simple 3-bedroom house on the edge of town. I planted a vegetable garden. I fixed my own fence. I wanted normal again. I founded the Henry Hale Foundation for Financial Wisdom, a nonprofit teaching working-class families about budgeting, compound interest, and long-term investing. Every month, I hold a free workshop at the community center. People come in with notebooks, asking questions about savings, debt, and retirement. Your time, I tell them, is more valuable than your paycheck. The sooner you plant, the more years your seeds have to grow. Tommy, my cousin Rob Carter's son, runs the daily operations. Under his management, we've helped more than 300 families open their first investment accounts. Watching people take control of their financial lives has been more satisfying than any dollar amount I've earned. Meanwhile, Claire works as a receptionist at a dental clinic across town. She drives an old Toyota and rents a modest apartment. The glamorous life she built on lies turned out to be as fragile as glass. Paul Whitmore served 2 years in federal prison and lost his law license permanently. Judge Martin Brennan got 5 and forfeited his pension. Sometimes justice moves slowly, but it still moves. The irony of it all isn't lost on me. My grandfather, who never earned more than $18,000 a year, who worked in the same tool factory for 40 years and never once took a vacation. He understood money better than any Wall Street analyst. He used to say, "Patience is the richest currency, Nathan. Spend it wisely." Now, every time a young investor brags about crypto gains or risky trades, I point to the photo of my grandfather on my office shelf. That man turned $50 into $13 million, I tell them, not through luck or schemes, but through consistency, humility, and time. I still keep his old savings passbook and the letter he left me in a small wooden box on my desk. Some nights, when the house is quiet, I take it out and read the last line again. Never show all your cards, Nathan. Not to the world, not even to the people closest to you. He was right. The strongest position is the one no one sees coming. And when the time comes to play your hand, you'll take everything. If this story moved you, share it with someone who's rebuilding their life. Remember, patience and integrity are the 2 investments that never fail. Sometimes the darkest chapters lead to the brightest returns. You just have to wait long enough to see them unfold.